The piercing wail of the emergency alarm cut through the sterile silence of the Meridian Research Institute at precisely 2:47 p.m., followed immediately by the mechanical voice echoing through every corridor. Code red. Immediate evacuation required. This is not a drill. Dr. Kwame Adeyemi looked up from his microscope, his dark eyes reflecting the flashing red warning lights that had suddenly bathed his pristine laboratory in an ominous crimson glow. Heavy boots thundered down the hallway outside his lab. Through the reinforced glass windows, Kwame watched as figures in full hazmat suits stormed past, their yellow protective gear making them look like alien invaders descending upon his life's work. The foam dispensers mounted on the ceiling began releasing thick, white clouds that settled over his carefully organized equipment, like snow in hell. Dr. Adeyemi. The voice boomed through a megaphone from somewhere beyond the chaos. Step away from all equipment and exit the laboratory with your hands visible. Confusion crashed over him like a cold wave. His hands trembled as he set down the slide containing what could be humanity's breakthrough against pancreatic cancer. 3 years of painstaking research, countless 18-hour days, and sleepless nights spent perfecting the cellular regeneration protocol that had shown 93% success rates in laboratory trials. Now, it was being buried under emergency foam, as if it were radioactive waste. The laboratory door burst open with a violent bang that sent glass equipment rattling on nearby tables. 4 figures in hazmat suits rushed in, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, their movements precise and military-trained. Behind them strode Agent Sarah Martinez of the CDC's Emergency Response Unit, her clipboard clutched in latex-gloved hands like a weapon. "Dr. Adeyemi, you need to come with us immediately," she said, her voice muffled through the suit's communication system. "We have credible intelligence suggesting unauthorized biological weapons research is being conducted in this facility." Biological weapons. Kwame's voice cracked with disbelief. "Agent Martinez, you know my work. I'm developing cancer treatment protocols, not weapons. We've collaborated on regulatory reviews for 2 years. The source indicates you've been manipulating viral vectors to create enhanced pathogenic capabilities." Martinez continued, reading directly from her clipboard. "Specifically, modified influenza strains with increased mortality rates and transmission vectors." The words hit him like physical blows. Enhanced pathogens, mortality rates, transmission vectors. Someone had taken the technical language of his legitimate research and twisted it into something monstrous, something that sounded like the blueprint for genocide rather than salvation. "That's absolutely false." Kwame stepped forward, but the hazmat team immediately raised their hands in warning. "My viral vectors are therapeutic delivery systems for tumor suppression genes. They're designed to target cancer cells specifically, not healthy tissue. The mortality I'm measuring is cancer cell death, not human subjects." Agent Martinez hesitated for a moment, her pen hovering over the clipboard. Through her visor, Kwame could see her eyes darting between his face and the official papers in her hands. She had known him professionally for years, had even praised his ethical research standards in previous interactions. "Sir, I need you to understand that we received a detailed report from a credible source within the biotechnology industry," she said, her voice carrying a note of apology. "The caller provided specific technical details about your research that only someone with intimate knowledge of your work would know." "What caller? Who made this report?" Martinez flipped through several pages before responding. The initial emergency call came from Karen Whitfield, Senior Policy Director at Pharmacon Industries. She contacted both the CDC and FBI simultaneously, claiming immediate and imminent threat to public safety. The name struck Kwame like lightning. Karen Whitfield, the woman who had been systematically undermining his research funding applications for the past 18 months, who had testified before congressional subcommittees that independent cancer research posed regulatory risks, who had been instrumental in blocking 3 separate grants that would have advanced his work by years. Karen Whitfield, whose pharmaceutical lobby had billions invested in maintaining the current cancer treatment industry exactly as it was, profitable and endless. "She's lying," Kwame said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "Agent Martinez, Karen Whitfield's organization stands to lose enormous profits if my treatment protocol succeeds. This is industrial sabotage disguised as public safety." "Dr. Adeyemi, I need you to place your hands behind your back," Martinez said, producing a set of restraints. "We'll sort through the details during debriefing, but right now, we have to follow emergency protocols." The cold metal clicked around his wrists as the hazmat team began systematically destroying 3 years of meticulous research. Foam continued cascading from the ceiling dispensers, coating his computer terminals, his tissue samples, his carefully documented experimental results. Equipment worth millions of dollars disappeared under the white deluge, like ancient civilizations buried by volcanic ash. As they led him from the laboratory, Kwame caught sight of the news vans already assembled in the parking lot. Their satellite dishes extended toward the sky like mechanical flowers reaching for sunlight. Reporters clustered around the building perimeter, their cameras trained on the windows of his now contaminated research facility. The story was already spreading. 6 hours earlier, Kwame had been sitting in his modest kitchen, sharing morning coffee with his wife Amara, while reviewing the latest test results on his laptop. The pancreatic cancer cells they had been targeting showed unprecedented vulnerability to his modified viral delivery system, with tumor reduction rates that exceeded every existing treatment protocol by substantial margins. "The Phase 2 trials are going to change everything," he had told Amara, his excitement barely contained as he showed her the cellular imagery on his screen. "We're not just treating cancer anymore. We're essentially reprogramming the body's immune system to recognize and eliminate tumor cells with surgical precision." Amara, herself a physician specializing in oncology, understood the implications immediately. "Kwame, if these results hold up in human trials, you're talking about turning one of the deadliest forms of cancer into a manageable condition." "Manageable might be understating it," he had replied, scrolling through pages of data that represented hope for millions of patients worldwide. "Early indicators suggest we might be looking at actual cure rates approaching 80% for stage 2 and 3 cases." Their daughter Zara had wandered into the kitchen then, still in her pajamas, complaining about having to present her science fair project to the entire school assembly. At 14, she possessed her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassionate nature, though she was still young enough to be more concerned with teenage social dynamics than medical breakthroughs. "Dad, can you help me practice my presentation one more time?" she had asked, sliding into the chair beside him. "I want to make sure I explain the cellular respiration process clearly enough that even the 8th graders can understand it." Kwame had closed his laptop and devoted the next 30 minutes to helping Zara refine her explanation of mitochondrial function, never imagining that by afternoon, his own research would be classified as a threat to national security, and his laboratory would be sealed under emergency quarantine. The holding room at the federal building downtown felt like a concrete tomb, its fluorescent lights humming with the persistent buzz of institutional neglect. Kwame sat at a metal table, his hands now free, but his mind imprisoned by the surreal turn his life had taken in the span of a few hours. Through the small window, he could see protesters beginning to gather on the street below, their signs demanding answers about the bioweapon facility in their community. Agent Martinez entered the room, carrying a thick folder and a recording device. Her hazmat suit now replaced with standard business attire. Her expression was professional, but troubled, as if she were wrestling with doubts about the entire situation. "Dr. Adeyemi, I need to record this interview for the official investigation," she said, activating the digital recorder. "Can you walk me through your current research project from the beginning?" Agent Martinez, before we proceed, I need you to understand something crucial. Kwame leaned forward, his voice intense but measured. My research focuses on engineering viral vectors that can deliver therapeutic genes directly to cancer cells. These vectors are modified influenza viruses, yes, but they've been completely stripped of their pathogenic properties and rebuilt as molecular delivery systems. Martinez opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed his laboratory equipment, his computer screens displaying cellular cultures, and most damning of all, Petri dishes containing what appeared to be viral specimens. According to the intelligence report we received, you've been conducting experiments designed to increase viral transmission rates and enhance pathogenic lethality, she said, pointing to specific images. The source provided detailed descriptions of your modification protocols that suggest weaponization rather than therapeutic application. Kwame studied the photographs with growing alarm. Someone had been in his laboratory, someone with enough technical knowledge to photograph his work and misrepresent it convincingly. The viral cultures shown in the images were indeed his therapeutic vectors, but the accompanying documentation had been deliberately distorted to suggest malicious intent. Agent Martinez, these are the same viral vectors I've been developing for cancer therapy, but someone has systematically mischaracterized their purpose, he explained, his finger tracing the evidence laid out before him. The increased transmission rates being referenced actually refer to the vector's improved ability to penetrate tumor cell membranes. The enhanced lethality measurements document their effectiveness at destroying cancer cells, not healthy human tissue. The source claims you've been testing these vectors on human subjects without proper authorization. Martinez continued, reading from her notes. Specifically, that you've been injecting terminal cancer patients with experimental viral agents outside of approved clinical trial protocols. The accusation hit Kwame like a physical blow. Everything he had worked for, every ethical standard he had maintained throughout his career, every sleepless night spent ensuring patient safety in his research design, was being systematically dismantled by someone who understood his work well enough to weaponize it against him. "That's completely false," he said, his voice steady, despite the rage building in his chest. "Every aspect of my research has been conducted according to strict laboratory protocols, with cell cultures and animal models only. I haven't even submitted applications for human clinical trials yet, because I wanted to ensure absolute safety and efficacy first." Martinez was quiet for several minutes, studying both the photographs and Kwame's face, as if trying to reconcile conflicting pieces of evidence. Finally, she closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Dr. Adeyemi, I've worked with you on regulatory compliance issues for 2 years, and nothing in your professional history suggests the kind of reckless behavior described in this report," she admitted. However, the source provided information that demonstrates intimate knowledge of your research methodologies and laboratory procedures. "Which brings us back to Karen Whitfield," Kwame said grimly. "Agent Martinez, 3 months ago, Karen requested a comprehensive briefing on my research as part of a regulatory review process. I provided detailed technical documentation, including viral modification protocols, cellular targeting mechanisms, and preliminary efficacy data. Martinez opened her notepad and began writing rapidly. You're suggesting she used legitimate research information to fabricate a bioweapons threat. I'm suggesting that Karen Whitfield represents pharmaceutical interests that would be devastated if my cancer treatment proves successful. Kwame replied, current cancer therapies generate over $100 billion annually in the United States alone. A treatment protocol that could cure rather than manage the disease represents an existential threat to that industry. The door opened suddenly, and Agent Martinez's supervisor, Director William Hayes, entered the room with urgent energy. His usually composed demeanor showed cracks of strain as he approached the table where they sat. Martinez, we have a problem, Hayes said without preamble. The story has gone national. Every major news network is running headlines about a bioweapon laboratory discovered in our district, and the markets are responding accordingly. He tossed a tablet onto the table, its screen displaying cascading red numbers from various stock exchanges. Biotech stocks were plummeting across the board as investors panicked about potential bioweapons research in civilian laboratories. The Dow Jones had dropped over 400 points in the past 3 hours, with pharmaceutical companies leading the decline. Director Hayes, with respect, this appears to be exactly what someone wanted. Kwame interjected, market panic, public fear, and the complete destruction of research that threatens existing industry profits. Hayes studied Kwame with sharp eyes. Dr. Adeyemi, are you suggesting this entire situation is some kind of elaborate conspiracy? I'm suggesting that Karen Whitfield has orchestrated a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to eliminate competitive research. Kwame replied, she had access to my technical data. She understands the regulatory system well enough to trigger emergency responses, and her organization has billions of dollars in motivation. Martinez looked up from her notes. Director, I think we need to examine the source's motivations more carefully. Dr. Adeyemi's explanation addresses several inconsistencies I've noticed in the intelligence report. What kind of inconsistencies? The technical language used in the report demonstrates sophisticated understanding of viral modification techniques. But some of the conclusions drawn from that data seem deliberately misleading. Martinez explained, it's as if someone with legitimate expertise deliberately mischaracterized research findings to suggest malicious intent. Hayes was quiet for several minutes, his fingers drumming against the metal table as he processed the implications. Finally, he reached for his phone and dialed an internal number. This is Director Hayes. I need a complete background investigation on Karen Whitfield, Senior Policy Director at Pharmacon Industries, with specific focus on her professional relationship with Dr. Kwame Adeyemi and any financial interests that might be affected by his research outcomes. As Hayes made arrangements for expanded investigation, Kwame felt the first glimmer of hope since the morning's catastrophic events. Someone in authority was finally asking the right questions, looking beyond the surface allegations to examine the motivations behind them. But outside the federal building, the protest crowd was growing larger, and the news vans showed no signs of leaving. Whatever the truth might ultimately reveal, the damage to his reputation and research had already spread far beyond what any investigation could easily repair. The investigation took 3 days to uncover what should have been obvious from the beginning. Karen Whitfield's financial disclosure forms revealed a complex web of investments, consulting contracts, and board positions that tied her directly to maintaining the current cancer treatment industry's profitability. More damning still, phone records showed she had contacted 17 different media outlets within hours of making her emergency report, ensuring maximum publicity for the bioweapons allegations. Agent Martinez arrived at Kwame's house on Thursday evening, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal regret. Amara answered the door, her face showing the strain of 3 days spent watching her husband's career and reputation being systematically destroyed by sensationalist media coverage. Dr. Adeyemi, I have some important updates on the investigation, Martinez said as they settled in the living room. We've discovered evidence suggesting the bioweapons allegations were deliberately fabricated. Kwame looked up from the legal documents he had been reviewing, his eyes showing cautious optimism. What kind of evidence? Karen Whitfield's communication records show she spent considerable time researching your work before making the emergency report, Martinez explained, consulting her notes. She accessed technical databases, reviewed your published papers, and even obtained copies of your grant applications through industry contacts. So she studied my research specifically to find ways to misrepresent it. More than that, we found emails between Whitfield and her supervisors at Pharmacon Industries, discussing strategies for discrediting competitive cancer research. Your work was specifically mentioned as a threat that needed to be neutralized before it could proceed to human trials. Amara leaned forward intently. Are you saying this entire situation was planned industrial sabotage? The evidence strongly suggests coordinated efforts to destroy Dr. Adeyemi's research using false national security concerns, Martinez confirmed. However, proving criminal intent will require additional investigation and potentially federal prosecution resources. Kwame felt vindication and rage warring in his chest. 3 years of research had been destroyed, his professional reputation damaged potentially beyond repair, and his family subjected to public scrutiny and private anguish, all to protect pharmaceutical profits. Agent Martinez, what happens now? My laboratory has been sealed, my research materials destroyed, and my funding sources are terminating their support based on the publicity. Director Hayes has authorized full restoration of your laboratory access and research materials, Martinez replied. We're also prepared to issue public statements clarifying that no bioweapons research was discovered and that the initial allegations appear to have been deliberately false. But the damage has already been done, Amara pointed out grimly. The news coverage focused on terrifying headlines about bioweapons, not careful analysis of evidence. How many people will actually pay attention to corrections and clarifications? Martinez acknowledged the point with a troubled nod. That's why Director Hayes wants to discuss additional measures that might help restore Dr. Adeyemi's professional standing. There's going to be a major international health summit next week in Geneva, focusing specifically on breakthrough cancer research and regulatory frameworks. Kwame looked skeptical. And you think my research will be welcome there after this week's publicity disaster? Actually, we think this situation has created an opportunity to expose the kind of industry manipulation that's been suppressing legitimate medical research, Martinez said with growing enthusiasm. Director Hayes believes your case could become a catalyst for broader reforms in how breakthrough treatments are evaluated and protected from commercial interference. The possibility intrigued Kwame, though he remained cautious about exposing his family to additional public scrutiny. What exactly would this involve? The summit includes representatives from the World Health Organization, major research institutions, and regulatory agencies from over 40 countries. Martinez explained, if you were willing to present your cancer treatment research in that forum, with full governmental support and protection, it could demonstrate both the legitimate nature of your work and the tactics being used to suppress it. Amara squeezed her husband's hand encouragingly. Kwame, this could be exactly what we need to turn this disaster into something positive. That evening, Kwame sat in his home office reviewing the salvaged data from his research files. Much of his work had been backed up on secure servers that survived the laboratory contamination, and the cellular samples could be recreated within several months of intensive effort. The cancer treatment protocol was damaged, but not destroyed. More importantly, the investigation into Karen Whitfield's activities was revealing a pattern of similar attacks on other researchers whose work threatened established pharmaceutical interests. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's diabetes treatment research had been delayed for years by sudden regulatory challenges that appeared after industry lobbying. Dr. Michael Chen's gene therapy protocols had been subjected to unexpected safety reviews that stalled his clinical trials indefinitely. The scope of systematic suppression was broader than Kwame had imagined, affecting dozens of researchers across multiple disease categories. Karen Whitfield was not acting alone, but as part of an organized effort to maintain profitable treatment models by eliminating potential cures. As he prepared for the Geneva summit, Kwame realized that his personal vindication was only the beginning. The real battle would be fought on an international stage, with the future of medical research independence hanging in the balance. The World Health Organization's headquarters in Geneva buzzed with unusual energy as delegates from 43 countries gathered for the emergency summit on medical research integrity. The agenda had been hastily revised to include Dr. Kwame Adeyemi's presentation, titled Industrial Sabotage of Breakthrough Cancer Research, a Case Study in Systematic Suppression. Kwame stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included Nobel laureates, pharmaceutical executives, government health officials, and investigative journalists from major international news organizations. Behind him, a large screen displayed the cellular imagery that had started this entire ordeal, cancer cells being systematically destroyed by his therapeutic viral vectors. Distinguished delegates, what you are seeing represents 3 years of research into pancreatic cancer treatment protocols that show unprecedented success rates, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall's advanced sound system. These same images were misrepresented 6 days ago as evidence of bioweapons development, resulting in the destruction of my laboratory and an international security alert. Murmurs rippled through the audience as delegates consulted their briefing materials. The story had been front-page news globally, but few attendees had access to the detailed evidence that emerged during the subsequent investigation. The false allegations were made by Karen Whitfield, Senior Policy Director at Pharmacon Industries, whose organization represents pharmaceutical companies with over $80 billion invested in current cancer treatment modalities. Kwame continued, advancing to the next slide. Ms. Whitfield had detailed knowledge of my research through legitimate regulatory review processes, knowledge she used to fabricate credible-sounding bioweapons allegations. Dr. Helena Andersson, representing the Swedish Medical Research Council, raised her hand for recognition. Dr. Adeyemi, you're alleging deliberate industrial sabotage of potentially life-saving research. Do you have evidence of broader patterns beyond your individual case? I do, Kwame replied, clicking to a slide showing a network diagram. Investigation by U.S. federal agencies has identified similar attacks on researchers in diabetes treatment, gene therapy, and autoimmune disorders. In each case, breakthrough research that threatened existing treatment profits was subjected to regulatory challenges, funding disruptions, or false safety allegations. The audience was now completely silent, the gravity of the accusations settling over the assembly like a heavy blanket. Dr. James Patterson from the British Medical Research Institute leaned forward in his seat. Dr. Adeyemi, what specific evidence connects these various incidents to coordinated industry action? Kwame advanced to his most damning slide, showing email communications between pharmaceutical lobbyists, discussing strategies for neutralizing competitive research threats. The messages, obtained through the federal investigation, revealed a systematic approach to identifying and suppressing breakthrough medical research through regulatory manipulation and public relations campaigns. These communications were discovered during the investigation into my case, but they reference multiple researchers and research projects spanning the past 5 years. Kwame explained. The tactics include false safety allegations, manufactured regulatory crises, and coordinated media campaigns designed to destroy public confidence in breakthrough treatments. Director General Maria Santos of the World Health Organization stood from her position at the main table, her expression grim. Dr. Adeyemi, if these allegations are substantiated, they represent a fundamental threat to global medical research integrity and public health advancement. Director General Santos, that's exactly why I'm here. Kwame replied, this is not just about my research or my personal vindication. It's about protecting the research environment that makes medical breakthroughs possible. As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted at the back of the assembly hall. Karen Whitfield had arrived, flanked by 2 expensive attorneys and a small army of public relations professionals. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her navy business suit impeccable, her expression radiating the confident authority of someone accustomed to controlling narratives and outcomes. Dr. Adeyemi, I appreciate your concerns, but I think you're mischaracterizing legitimate regulatory oversight as some kind of conspiracy, she said, her voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. My report to federal authorities was based on credible intelligence about dangerous research practices that could threaten public safety. The assembly hall erupted in excited whispers as delegates realized they were witnessing the confrontation between accuser and accused, playing out in real time. Karen's dramatic entrance had been carefully calculated to disrupt Kwame's presentation and shift attention back to her version of events. Ms. Whitfield, you're not authorized to address this assembly, Director General Santos pointed out firmly. However, since you've chosen to attend, perhaps you'd like to respond to the evidence Dr. Adeyemi has presented. Karen moved toward the front of the hall with practiced confidence, her attorneys following closely behind. Director General, I welcome the opportunity to clarify several misunderstandings about my organization's legitimate concerns regarding unregulated biotechnology research. She gestured toward the screen, showing Kwame's research data. What you're seeing here represents exactly the kind of dangerous viral modification work that requires strict oversight and regulation. Dr. Adeyemi may have good intentions, but his methods create serious biosafety risks that cannot be ignored. Kwame felt his anger rising, but forced himself to respond with scientific precision rather than emotional reaction. Ms. Whitfield, you're describing therapeutic viral vectors as biosafety risks, while ignoring their potential to save millions of lives. More importantly, you're avoiding the central question of why you misrepresented my research as bioweapons development. I reported what appeared to be dangerous research practices to appropriate authorities. Karen replied smoothly. The fact that subsequent investigation cleared you of criminal wrongdoing doesn't invalidate my original concerns about biosafety protocols. Dr. Anderson from Sweden stood and addressed Karen directly. Ms. Whitfield, the evidence presented suggests you had detailed knowledge of Dr. Adeyemi's research methodology through legitimate channels. Yet you characterized therapeutic research as weapons development. How do you explain that discrepancy? Karen's composure flickered slightly, but her attorneys immediately whispered instructions in her ear. Dr. Anderson, I'm not able to discuss specific intelligence sources or investigative procedures in this public forum. However, I maintain that my actions were motivated entirely by legitimate public safety concerns. Director General Santos consulted briefly with her advisors before standing to address the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have a situation that extends beyond the normal scope of this summit's agenda. However, given the international implications of these allegations, I believe we should proceed with a full examination of the evidence. She gestured toward a side entrance where several serious-looking individuals in dark suits were entering the hall. I've taken the liberty of inviting representatives from Interpol's Economic Crime Division to observe these proceedings. Given the potential for international criminal activity affecting medical research, Karen's confident demeanor evaporated as she recognized the implications of international law enforcement involvement. Her attorneys immediately moved to flank her more protectively, and urgent whispered conferences began among her public relations team. Agent Inspector Claude Dubois of Interpol approached the main table and conferred quietly with Director General Santos before addressing the assembly. Distinguished delegates, we have been investigating allegations of international economic sabotage affecting medical research in multiple countries. The evidence presented by Dr. Adeyemi corresponds with intelligence we've gathered regarding systematic efforts to suppress breakthrough medical treatments. The assembly hall was now completely silent, delegates recognizing they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple research presentation. Karen stood frozen near the front of the hall, her legal team frantically consulting documents and making urgent phone calls. Inspector Dubois, are you suggesting that the attacks on Dr. Adeyemi's research are part of a broader international conspiracy? Asked Dr. Patterson from Britain. We're suggesting that economic interests have systematically interfered with medical research across multiple jurisdictions, using tactics that may constitute criminal conspiracy to commit economic sabotage. Dubois replied carefully. The evidence gathered in Dr. Adeyemi's case has provided crucial connections to similar incidents in the European Union, Canada, and Australia. Kwame watched as Karen's attorneys surrounded her in urgent consultation. The confident woman who had entered the hall to challenge his presentation was now trapped in the spotlight of international criminal investigation, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling under scrutiny from law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. Ms. Whitfield, in light of these developments, would you care to revise your earlier statements? Director General Santos asked with diplomatic formality that barely concealed the gravity of the situation. Karen looked toward her attorneys, who were shaking their heads emphatically and gesturing for her to remain silent. The public relations professionals who had accompanied her were already beginning to distance themselves physically from the developing crisis. Director General, on advice of counsel, I decline to make any further statements at this time, Karen said, her voice now lacking the confident authority she had displayed upon entering. Inspector Dubois stepped forward with official documentation. Ms. Whitfield, you are being served with an international warrant for investigation of economic crimes related to medical research sabotage. You will need to accompany us for formal questioning. The arrest unfolded with shocking swiftness. Karen's attorneys protested vigorously, but their client was led from the assembly hall in handcuffs as delegates watched in stunned silence. The carefully orchestrated public relations event she had planned to control had become the stage for her own dramatic downfall. As the commotion subsided, Director General Santos called the assembly back to order. Dr. Adeyemi, in light of these extraordinary developments, would you be willing to continue your presentation regarding the protection of legitimate medical research? Kwame returned to the podium, But his prepared remarks about research integrity suddenly seemed inadequate for the moment. Instead, he looked out at the assembly and spoke from his heart about the broader implications of what they had all just witnessed. Distinguished delegates, what happened here today represents both a victory and a warning. A victory because the truth about medical research suppression has been exposed on an international stage. A warning because Karen Whitfield is not an isolated actor, but representative of systematic efforts to prioritize profits over human suffering. He clicked to his final slide, showing not research data, but photographs of cancer patients whose lives could be saved by breakthrough treatments that never reached clinical trials due to industry interference. These are the real stakes of research integrity. He concluded, every treatment that's suppressed, every cure that's delayed, every breakthrough that's destroyed represents human lives lost to artificial scarcity, created by those who profit from prolonged suffering. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, led by Director General Santos herself. But more importantly, the emergency summit concluded with unprecedented international agreements to protect medical research from commercial interference and create rapid response mechanisms for researchers facing industry retaliation. 6 months later, Kwame stood in a new laboratory, funded by an international consortium of governments and research institutions committed to ensuring independence from pharmaceutical industry pressure. His cancer treatment research had not only resumed, but expanded, with collaborative efforts involving researchers from 12 countries working toward human clinical trials, scheduled for early the following year. Karen Whitfield had been convicted of economic sabotage and conspiracy charges in 3 different countries, receiving a sentence of 8 years in prison and lifetime bans from involvement in medical or pharmaceutical industries. More significantly, her prosecution had led to broader investigations that exposed similar suppression efforts affecting dozens of researchers worldwide. Amara entered the new laboratory carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied smile of someone whose faith had been vindicated. The Morning News is reporting that 3 more pharmaceutical executives have been indicted based on evidence from the Whitfield investigation, she said, setting coffee beside Kwame's computer terminal. Justice is satisfying, but it's not the real victory. Kwame replied, gesturing toward his computer screen where new experimental data showed continued success in targeting pancreatic cancer cells. The real victory is that breakthrough medical research can now proceed without fear of systematic sabotage. Their daughter Zara bounded into the laboratory, now 15 and increasingly interested in following her parents' path into medical research. Dad, I saw the news about your research being featured in Nature magazine. They're calling it one of the most promising cancer treatments in modern medical history. Kwame hugged his daughter, reflecting on how close they had all come to losing everything to false allegations and industry manipulation. Zara, the most important lesson from this whole experience is that truth and ethical research will ultimately prevail, but only if people are willing to fight for them. Outside their new laboratory, construction crews were building additional research facilities as part of the International Medical Research Independence Initiative, funded by governments determined to ensure that breakthrough treatments could be developed without commercial interference. The initiative had attracted researchers from around the world whose work had been suppressed or delayed by industry pressure. As evening settled over the research complex, Kwame reviewed the preliminary results from expanded trials of his cancer treatment protocol. The therapeutic viral vectors were showing even better results than his original research had suggested, with success rates approaching 95% in laboratory conditions and promising indicators for upcoming human trials. The bioweapon lie had been intended to destroy his research and protect pharmaceutical profits, but instead, it had exposed the systematic suppression of medical breakthroughs and created international momentum for research independence. Karen Whitfield's attempt to maintain artificial scarcity in cancer treatment had ultimately accelerated the development of potential cures. Sometimes, Kwame reflected, the most devastating attacks on truth create the very conditions necessary for truth's ultimate triumph. His research would proceed. His family had survived the ordeal stronger than before, and the global medical research community had gained powerful new protections against future attempts at suppression. The laboratory lights dimmed automatically as evening protocols activated, but Kwame remained at his desk, reviewing data that represented hope for millions of cancer patients worldwide. Tomorrow would bring new experiments, new discoveries, and continued progress toward treatments that could transform cancer from a death sentence into a manageable condition. The bioweapon lie had failed completely, but the truth it was meant to suppress would endure for generations, saving lives that artificial scarcity would have sacrificed to protect profits. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered.